I'm Zoe Tompkins, and I'm the project lead on Decolonising Computing. This is a scholarship project within the School of Computing and Communications at the Open University. And myself and Amaninda and Kate are going to talk through some slides and then take a Q&A at the end of the session. So I'll just hand over to Amaninda to say hi, and then over to Kate to say hi as well before we start the presentation.
Hello, everybody. My name is Amaninda. I'm a lecturer in computing in Open University, and I'll talk through a few slides. And I work with lovely Zoe and Kate on this project.
And hello, everyone. My name's Kate Felicello. I'm also a lecturer within the School of Computing and Communications at the Open University, and likewise working with Amaninda and Zoe on this project.
Okay, so thank you for the introductions, and moving on to the next slide. Let's see if that's going to work. Yep, okay. So quite simply, we have two session goals for this evening. And firstly, we're going to be talking through our interpretation of what decolonising computing means from the research team perspective. And then, probably the main reason why you're here, I hope, is that we're going to share some initial findings from the desk-based research that we've done in the higher education sector around what decolonising computing activities are currently out there and to be found on public-facing websites. So that's the main two purposes of tonight's session. Okay, so where to start? In good teacherly style, often we begin with a definition. And this is probably the question that we all get asked the most, especially conferences, when we're presenting, doing a workshop or doing a poster, and also internally when we're talking with colleagues, we get asked, what does decolonising computing mean? And I've realised now in preparing for this session that every time I give a completely different answer. So I think it's okay to say that there is really no one definition. But to set the scene, we do need to be thinking about the fact that there is widespread discussion in the whole of the higher education sector around decolonising the university and also decolonising the curriculum or curricula. And one starting point would be to say that this grew from the 2015 Rhodes Must Fall movement, which was in Cape Town in South Africa, and then came to here in the UK, to Oxford, with the demand by those students to remove the statue of Cecil Rhodes, who was a white supremacist. Now, decolonising the curriculum should be one of the most important conversations that universities today in higher education in the West are having, because those higher education...
I just had a little issue with my device. Hopefully you can still hear me. Built on power and privilege of the dominant white and continue to be at the expense of the ethnic minorities who remain on the periphery. So universities, including one that we work for, were often founded by money from colonial plunder and enslavement, and universities continue to look at the world through the Western lens of this like Eurocentric or Eurocentrism view. And it's Hansworth that I turn to, who suggests it's imperative that those involved in curriculum development, so be you academics or otherwise, that we begin by considering our own identities, our own biases, our backgrounds in the creation of curricula and teaching experiences in order to better understand how these impact on student learning experiences and how we should adapt our teaching appropriately. So the decolonial turn, which you see here on the left on the slide, is also open to individual interpretation. But the word radical springs to mind, and it's a radical reform of what and how we teach, and practice is the simplest starting point, as the turn relates to a shared view of coloniality as an ongoing challenge, and we're certainly not there yet towards the end of this process. We also began by considering our own positionality in relation to this project. So we agree that computing in this context should refer to the study of IT systems and related disciplines rather than the narrow field of computer science only. And this is necessary as it entails a fundamentally social tech, so social technical perspective on computing, so the tech with the people. So when you're embracing the decolonial option as an ethical position, this requires creating space for those non-dominant forms of knowledge. And in order to do this, you have to dismantle, you have to destroy, you have to break down dominant sources of power and control in the historically white institutions. So thinking about decolonizing is a start, and you're here this evening, so that's great that you are thinking about it and you're participating in this session. But how to move from discussion to change, well, this is a challenge, as it's a challenge to our culture, to our structures, to our strategy. And in order to see long-term change, we've got to start speaking out. And this is what personally drives me. So events like this to give a space to the public acknowledgement of the problem and a much needed spotlight on what decolonizing is about. So if we assume that there is no universal template for how to decolonize or how to decolonize computing, decolonizing must therefore at least be contextual to the discipline and the subject area. And computing is arguably one of the trickiest areas for such work for several reasons. So as I've argued, computing needs to be viewed as a social tech field, as this helps to bring into focus issues tied up with social relations, political and economic. And as university educators, we consciously or perhaps unconsciously adopt the Eurocentric, West-centric perspective in the production of knowledge and teaching content. That's all we've known, that's all that we do. And therefore, by default, we are also complicit, because through those educational institutions, we perpetuate the Western dominance and the exclusion of the marginalized. So that's a bit heavy on all the theory and what it means for decolonizing computing and where our starting point is. I hope I haven't turned anybody off by this point, as we're now going to go on to illustrate with some examples of what this might mean in practice, because this is often, again, talking with peers, with colleagues, with other educators, is saying, okay, you give me a definition, so where is it happening? So the next few slides are going to illustrate some examples of that. And so the decolonization, by thinking about the process of revealing and dismantling colonialist power in all its forms, what does this mean in practice? So we started questioning sort of our own materials. So are we representing all voices? Do students see themselves represented? This includes imagery, case studies, language. Why are all the authors, say, UK or US based? And one way to illustrate this bias is actually to look to industry and to see other examples that are going on in everyday situations. So for example, here, in requesting a new passport, how for some groups there is a challenge of the increasing bias that's demonstrated by artificial intelligence, by AI. So for example, here we see face recognition software. So the image on the left, the UK passport photo checker, it shows that women with darker skin are quite more likely to be told that their photo fails the passport rules. So the women with the darkest skin tone were more likely to have their photo rejected than women with the lightest skin. And then the image on the right, this was from a passport application in New Zealand, where the applicant was also trying a passport, but they were repeatedly told that their photo was rejected because they were assessed by the AI as having their eyes closed. And an app that I go to quite regularly, Google Translate, is also another source of bias, of AI-coded bias. And there has replications here for all sorts of different reasons. And although Google Translate is available in 133 languages, which seems a lot, and the system supposedly, according to a spokesperson, is rigorously trained to ensure every language meets a high standard, a Google spokesperson then continued to say, but without sufficient data, it can be difficult to develop language translation and speech recognition at scale. And what they mean is at the scale that recognises those that might have a regional dialect or a language that's not within those 133 that they have. And this actually then means that, for example, in this here we've got at a California detention center where staff speak English or Spanish, the AI is used to interpret, but it doesn't have all those regional dialects. So when an Afro-Indigenous male who speaks a Portuguese dialogue but doesn't read or write it, the AI didn't pick up. And Carlos, that's not his real name, spent 6 months in detention, unable to have meaningful conversation or communication with those that are making decisions about his life. So, for example, interpreting, he'd come up with thinking that the word I, meaning one person, was instead saying we, so suggesting a family was making a claim. Or when using colloquial language, it was misinterpreted. A female that was claiming sexual abuse was that they thought when she was talking about her father, they interpreted it as being boss. And lots of nuances. So this bias continues within the AI as well. And then another example here is might take you back, if you can remember, looking at the original emojis. So just for those of you that aren't familiar, these are miniature pictograms. And although contemporary ones are much more broad and represent a variety of faces and genders and sexual orientations, the original emoji set was criticised for its racial homogeneity, meaning the ethnic characters were represented as white, so as you can see in the image that's presented there. So this lack of racial representation within the emoji set is a result of colourblind racism and could be linked to both politics of the technical systems and also a refusal to recognise that racial homogeneity of the original emoji set was problematic in the first place. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Amin to give examples now. I think you're on mute.
So hopefully you can hear me now. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. And so thanks, Zoe. So I'm going to start looking at a couple of pictures. So start to think about how we're using technology nowadays. So we can trace the global life cycle of a typical laptop computer or a PC or mobile phone, which we use nowadays, from the material origins in rare earth element mines in Africa or in South America, to its manufacture and assembly in factory cities of China or other countries, and through its transportation and distribution to retail stores and households across America, Europe, and finally to its eventual disposal in places like the slums of certain countries. And there is one country which is very popular for this type of landfill, which is Ghana. Now, 90% of the waste transported to Ghana includes lead, dioxins, and carcinogens dumped into landfill, and it contaminates the water supply. Children melt down components to extract various different metals like copper, aluminum, and mercury. Smoke from open fires create personal and environmental damage, dangers for those children and for people living in those countries as well. Now, the image on the right is America's largest Superfund site. It's called Tart Creek, Oklahoma. It's home to the Keopak Indians, once a productive lead and zinc mining site, and now it is an environmental wasteland in the 40 square mile area. And think about Ghana. Now we can just think about the fact that 250,000 tons of waste per year is transported to Ghana and dumped into landfill. And we're just talking about one country here. And we produce millions of tons of waste, that is e-waste, electronic waste per year as well. and that goes to landfill in various countries across the world. So that's kind of the environmental pollution, which is done by old e-waste, which is mostly used by people in Western societies. So Zoe, can you please move on? Thank you. If you could please move on the slide. Thank you. So the next thing we'll have a look on is the large language models, which are quite popular nowadays. We use ChatGPT, which have become very popular from last year, and also the other large language models like Bard from Google and Bing from Microsoft. The Copilot, they have now integrated within the Explorer. So we're using these models quite a lot nowadays. And there are so many new technologies coming out by the use of these models as well. But if you just think about, just stop a little bit, think about that, how the technology is enabling a new type of terrible work in which people, even from some advanced Western countries, but mostly the other countries where people are not so advanced at the moment, they complete mind-numbing tasks for hours on end, sometimes earning just pennies per job. And for many workers living in parts of the countries where the jobs have disappeared, obviated by technology or outsourcing, this work is all that's available for people with their qualifications. Now, this work of feeding the algorithms which power these machine learning large language models, now this work is a very growing business. It's a huge business. And the data collection and labeling industry is expected to grow and turn over 14 billion by 2030, according to Global Data, which is a data analytics and consultancy firm. Now, what it means is that most of this labeling work is done thousands of miles away from Silicon Valley. It's done in East Africa, in countries like India and Philippines. And people over there are quite low paid, and they're working 24 hours in many instances just for pittance. So that's what is happening in other countries, which many people using these technologies don't really even think about. So if you could please move on to the next slide. Thank you. So this is an example here in this picture shown. Dadaab is one of the world largest refugee camp. And the refugees are displaced, warehoused at the margins of the global system, and they're using work, finding work in the click working economy, which is used for the Silicon Valley. So what they're doing is basically trying to model these AI systems, and the repetitive tasks which they're doing under precarious conditions is made available by sites like Clickworker, Amazon Mechanical Turk, which allow microtasks to be posted. And these posts can be then picked up by those people in those countries, in these refugee camps as well. And there are other refugee camps in Middle East. There is one called the Shatila camp with Syrian refugees as well. So this micro work, which they can pick up, comes with no rights, no security, or it's very routine and very poor pay. They're stuck in camps, slums, and under colonial occupation. Workers work simply to subsist. These are conditions of bare life. So this is a hidden abode of automation, a globally dispersed complex of refugees, slum dwellers compelled to power the machine learning of companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon. So data labeling interfaces like the ones I've mentioned, these have evolved to treat crowd workers like machines, often prescribing them highly repetitive tasks, surveilling their movements, and also punishing any little deviation through automated tools. So this is a totally separate life, which we don't really see when we use these tools, like ChatGPT nowadays. Thank you. Please move on to the next slide. So the next thing in the next slide I'm going to say is how we actually started this decolonizing work. Now, one of the things which we did was an audit. So we did this audit to look at the higher educational institutes within the UK. So we looked at the Russell Group of universities, for example, King's College London. Then we also had a look on Etna Swan, Silver, universities, higher educational institutes like the Warwick University. We also had a look on other higher educational institutes in the UK space. And also we looked on various HEIs doing keyword searches. So we searched for terms like decolonizing STEM, decolonizing computing. So these then led us to various HEIs where we did more research. And this is how our audit was performed. Thank you. So if you could move on, please. Sorry. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about how we actually did this audit. So this was a desk-based research on the external facing public web pages. So we looked at the websites of those universities and HEIs. We looked at the information which was publicly available on decolonizing within the STEM and computing field. We had a standardized template which we created, and we completed that template for each of the higher educational institute and the universities. And once we had those templates completed, and then we compared those templates and we kind of collated them, and then we found information which was similar or which came out in the subject of STEM and mostly computing. So this is what we focused on. And when we started this audit, we had our 3-team project members, Kate, Zoe, and myself, but we also recruited 3 student researchers. So 6 of us worked together in this audit, and then we produced the audit. We collated all the information based on that. Thank you. So I think I'll pass on to Kate next.
Okay, thanks, Amaninda. So yeah, what we did, as Amaninda has said, is actually had a massive data. There was 7 of us actually working on this, or 6 of us, and we had a massive data that we had collected together. So what we tried to do was come up with some thematic analysis and actually divide this research into lots of different sort of areas. So we've listed on the next couple of slides all these different areas. So we had collaboration. So that can be collaboration at any point, so as it says there, between students and staff and other internal services within a university. The library usually features quite predominantly in decolonisation activities. But also these collaborations could be with other external services. So for example, if we list there museums, authorities, different professional computer association, or with other HEIs in Europe, Africa and Oceania, wherever is that collaboration occurs. We also had scholarship, so with papers written and articles published. And we will have examples of these as we go through. The next sort of section we looked at was resources. So have any resources actually been created, such as blogs, videos, toolkits to enable course teams to actually create decolonized courses, web pages, guides, poetry, anything you like in there. Whether there's any events going on, any talks, discussions, these examples of networking, and some of these examples could be across some of these areas as well. So moving on, we had any awards that have been gained by the teams. So we already mentioned previously that we looked at Athena Swan, so we haven't looked at that here, but any additional STEM learning awards, benchmark standards, best practice, whether there's any hubs or physical spaces. Probably now more online hubs since the COVID pandemic, but some universities do have physical spaces. So it could be somewhere where students can go to collaborate, to work on different projects, but it could be a studio, it could be computing education, research centre, anything for academic inclusion in science and engineering. Curriculum development, so anything that are module or lecture-wise, of actually moving forward our curriculum. And then the final one, strategy. Again, an example there of annual EDI report, but it can cover quite a wide range of things. So for example, it could be a sort of a high level statement from the university as well. So can I have next slide, please, Zoe? So in our first section, we had a collaboration. So we found some examples of that. Now, remember, we are looking at public-facing websites, so there may be more going on in these institutions than what we're aware of. So the samples that we found there at University of Swansea, they had the library and the student union actually asking the students to suggest new titles for their collection, of actually getting the students involved. At the University of Bath, students sit on the senior boards, both at the Senate and the Council. At Kent, the students and staff research leading to a manifesto. And in universities of Leicester and Kent, there is a partnership programme going on there to research the impact of curriculum reform on race equality gaps. So have next slide, please. This one's a bit of a busy slide, as you can imagine. There's probably quite a few papers actually being published in this area, and I've pulled out a few examples here just to give you an idea of the sorts of papers that have been published in this area. So the University of Edinburgh have produced an article on techno-solutionism and neo-colonial narratives and ICT and other engineering curriculum. So looking there, as you can read, that it's highly dependent on the colonial era exploitation of the global south, of technological process. And that kind of links in with what Amaninda was showing you about all the minerals being extracted and dumped in places like Ghana. The curriculum is mostly influenced by the requirements of profit-driven industries rather than societal needs. So it's obviously all down to industry. At Imperial College in London, there's been some research going on within the STEM with the double M. So they actually include their medicine in that. So they've got a very large medical department, and actually are working with teaching teams and looking at actually how we move towards that decolonization. There's quite a recognition that within the social sciences, so for example, history, we mentioned things about Cecil Rhodes earlier on and looking at history, it's quite easier to decolonize than perhaps in the more technical, the STEM area. But there's still a lot of barriers there. A lot of people kind of don't know about how to actually implement it. And that first paper was a small group, that research that was taken out. And then there was a novel data solution to inform curriculum decolonization. Again, it's a master's in public health, but they were looking at the examination of reading lists and taking those reading lists away from the bias of having from the global north, so from having publications that have been produced by the Western areas. At Cambridge University, they were looking at perceptions of decolonisation of teaching and learning. So they had a small study with a range of lecturers across a number of different areas, not just within STEM, to look at how decolonisation practices could be used and could be implemented in the classroom. And there was a lot in there about unconscious bias as well, and about how we overcome that area. Next slide, please, Zoe. So just starting on the resources. The resources that have been developed are quite wide-ranging that we found. So we have the University of Bristol have produced a newsletter about decolonising the Bristol curriculum that's available internally. They're still being published. Sometimes some of the areas that we find of some of the resources that we find have been developed a few years ago and perhaps not revisited. They also produced a podcast which was initiated in 2021 but not continued. And the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, probably not one that we would naturally think of in looking at STEM, particularly in our area of computing, but it's worth having a look at that wider range of things. And they were looking at a curation of images to tackle outdated or negative portrayals of minoritized groups. And they've also developed a blog and looking and exploring what restorative action looks like for students. Okay, I will now pass you back over to Zoe for the next few slides.
Actually, it had your initials, but it's okay.
Did it?
I don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Just to put into context why we're sharing the findings in this way is that we're hoping that you'll be able to think about in your role and your spheres of influence how you might be able to draw on some of these wide range of activities within these very loose thematic areas, these 8 areas, in terms of what you might be able to do later today, tomorrow, this month, within 6 months, or within your 5-year career plan, whatever it might be, and trying to kind of a catalyst for change. And so they're a bit dry in the way they're presented, and we've tried to put some images in to kind of show where we got the information from. But ultimately, it is a list, but it's not a toolkit. So it isn't saying this is a definite way of doing something. It's really there as a guide to say this is what's going on. And some of it is within computing, a real tiny slice, wider within STEM, but there's also some good practice across curricula and across universities. So another slide here talking about different types of resources that you might want to be utilizing. So I really like the idea that there was this digital journal archive that had been created by College in London to represent a wider range of voices and specifically lived experiences of the Indigenous perspective. I thought that was a brilliant initiative. There's lots and lots around reading lists, expanding reading lists, getting student recommendations. This seems to be very popular within the sector. So if you're thinking where to start, that might be one top of the list. There's also lots on getting a wider range of images. So no surprise that Bath listed there, but many of the universities are sourcing new images, looking at different publishers, different formats, and trying to therefore get a better sense of belonging within the content. Toolkits, yeah, absolutely. Most universities have got a toolkit that can be specific to decolonising or decolonising curriculum. Even the Times Higher Education has got a How Do I Get Started guide, which is like a toolkit. And often these toolkits are talking about inclusive curriculum. We've got one at the Open University. We're on version 5 or maybe 6 even, that are widely available for staff to use. And they're often a prompt to go away and be reflecting on the content and also not just what, but the how as well. And okay, so and then the 4th area out of the 8 was looking at events. There are a range of events that have been gone on historically, and of course we are restricted by the fact that we're only looking at these public-facing websites. But University of Edinburgh has got a showcase of decolonising the curriculum initiative. So they've got the podcasts, they've got sessions that are looking at decolonising a dissertation, so very student-focused. And going down to detail about referencing, so in-text citations. and looking in collaboration with the library to support students in their writing and their research. And again, another toolkit available for staff. Nice, actually May 2023, so that's fairly recent. And therefore also kind of trying to explain how to use more diverse resources in teaching. So the list there about, understanding race and racism, with articles as well, and auditing your resource list is all within these different approaches to these toolkits and these guides. So the step-by-step audit process to support staff and students in the decolonising initiatives. And then other events are also to be found at Oxford University. So as computer scientists, I'm sure you're very familiar with the term hackathon, which is meant to be a fun event. Never been to one, but I'm sure they're fun, in which teams try to compete to meet a technical design challenge. I'm sure Kate's done one. At Oxford, they're taking a novel challenge in that the design must be ethical and technical. So this is part of a focus on what they call RRI, responsible research and innovation, and they're exploring ways to integrate ethical and societal considerations into the processes and the products, so the outcomes of research and innovation within ICT. So this is the novel kind of ethical hackathon, and overlaps with collaboration, which is one of the themes that we identified initially, because it's collaboration between the computer scientists, between the engineers, between the ethicists, between the social scientists. So all to do with working collaboratively to address ethical issues arising from ICT. And another event that's going on, King's College here, demystifying decolonisation. There's lots of D's in the decolonising world. Student-led, students and staff can ask questions of the panel, invited other audiences, so it wasn't just UK, it was also representatives from the South African universities, all to share their experiences of decolonising HE within this event at King's College. Whilst at Imperial, this focus was on teaching staff rather than the students in this example, thinking about the curriculum content. What does it mean? What does it do? What doesn't it do? Looking at barriers for those who are marginalised and those that lack privilege. And then ultimately taking a critical position, asking difficult questions around how we're going to decolonise the curriculum. And the last event here that's outlined was at University of Sussex. So again, we're trying to show you the broad range of universities and higher education institutions that are involved in this area. So back in 2021, there was a half-day online event, opportunity for students and staff to explore examples of decolonising at Sussex, so within their university, but with the purpose to co-create and to work in partnership to develop the curriculum. Okay, I'm going to hand back over to Amaninda to talk about University of Kent and Diversity Mark.
Thanks, Zoe. So yes, looking at awards, we looked at University of Kent. So Diversity Mark is an institution-wide award that is given to modules that can go for a diverse and inclusive range of resources for their students while they're reading lists. So it's a collaborative initiative they run in conjunction with students, academic liaison teams, the Kent Union, and the student success team there at the University of Kent. So if you're applying for the Diversity Mark Award, then you need to show that you're diversifying your reading list, and you can apply for this mark. You can get support in achieving this award from your liaison librarian and student success team as well. So they give award to the individual conveners of schools that undergo a process of review and reflection with their students. And they also ensure that they've considered authors and perspectives from divergent backgrounds, such as race, gender, sexuality, disability, internationalization, socioeconomic context within their discipline as well. And this award is visible in Moodle, the VLE, which many universities use, and this will indicate to the enrolled students or those considering enrollment to particular modules that diverse resources are represented in the module reading list. And they tell us the criteria for receiving this award, and they have to see the evidence that the reading list has had diverse and inclusive resources added. Student feedback has informed the process. Also, there's continued practice in developing the teaching and learning resources. And based on these points, then they will give the diversity mark. If you could please move on to the next slide, Zoe. Thank you. So this is about the hub and the physical space. We looked at Exeter in their decolonizing network. So this is a network members. These collaborate across Exeter and Southwest to advance progressive knowledge and best practice around decolonial thoughts through dialogue, activities, and events within and beyond the university as well. So through this network, they aim to develop multiple forms of knowledge, teaching, learning, and research grounded in emancipatory and liberatory practices. So that's what they aim to do. And there is this reflection space as well, which they use to engage, reflect, and learn different ideas, but also unlearn the previous ideas and perspectives on decoloniality and anti-racism within and beyond this academy as well. So this network welcomes submissions around these particular themes, like creative, visual, non-conventional ways of disseminating knowledge in different languages. So these languages which are available are Arabic, French, English, Urdu, Kabyle, and also sign language. Then they've also got creativity space, which features some of the inspiring creative endeavors that students and staff affiliated to their network are engaging in. So they challenge both aesthetically and creatively the predominantly white space of Exeter students' theatre and arts, aim to create a diverse creative network and promote inclusivity within that. And then there is Roots Resistance, which is a student-led initiative that amplifies the voices of people of color and their allies. So in Exeter, they're doing quite a lot in there. So if you could please move on to the next slide, Zoe. Thank you. So this is the homepage of Nottingham Trent University. So you go to the library on there, and there's a page called Supporting Curricular Development. So they explain there what is meant by decolonized education. So there's an academic from the University of Cape Town in South Africa there. Also, in there you'll find discipline-specific resource lists. But the only thing is you need to be a staff member or a student of that university to go into it. So we could only see this on the public-facing website. But there are more resources apparently once you go inside the intranet. So there are also a set of critical questions for discipline areas to consider in parallel on the right-hand side. And also, in addition, there are links to external resources such as podcasts, which also look at decolonizing in this particular sector. So this is Nottingham Trent University, and they've got initiatives there as well on decolonizing. So if you could please move on to the next one. Thank you. Yes. So this one is the Aston University in Birmingham, and they're doing quite a bit in this space of decolonizing. They've got a curriculum working group which oversee the progress of projects through monthly meetings, which they have, including reviews and reflection on the impact on what they're doing. They collate case studies and impact statements that can be used to support wider engagement. They also liaise with deans and associate deans within the colleges to raise awareness of the project, and they kind of create a repository of discipline-specific guidance for staff on how to approach decolonization in their context, which is quite useful. And they deliver regular workshops that serve as safe spaces for staff to discuss issues of race and colonialism. They work with the education team to embed decolonization formally into the continual monitoring and enhancement of the modules as well, and also support the creation of online staff development materials. They've got podcasts there as well describing what decolonizing curriculum means, both for students and for staff. They've got library services which are supporting inclusive reading lists, and they're diversifying the reading list project, and where the students and staff can recommend resources via the website or by emailing staff. And then based on their feedback of students and staff, they update their lists for various modules. And they also work with the Students' Union and provide a forum for students to share their experiences on racism and colonialism. They also have a University Learning and Teaching Committee, which embed decolonizing the curriculum into the continual monitoring and enhancement of modules. Also the College Learning and Teaching Committee as well. Both these committees look at how decolonizing the curriculum is embedded by monitoring various modules within the university. The other committee they've got is Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So this ensures that relevant learnings from decolonizing the curriculum project are shared and embedded within non-academic areas of activity across the university as well. And they also have Aston Voices group, which create educational materials that promote an understanding of lived experience of racism and prejudice. So they're doing quite a lot of things across the university. And they do have an Associate Pro Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Inclusion, who ensures that this project directly informs initiatives that address the attainment gaps. So they're kind of closing the loop where the attainment gaps are based on the various backgrounds of the students, which they do get in the university. And they're trying to get all this information collated and then make sure that their awarding gaps and attainment gaps are reduced. So they're doing quite a bit. And at Aston, we found that it's one of the universities in the UK doing quite a lot in decolonizing space. And so next I'll move to Kate.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Amaninda. So our final section was about strategy. So this is actually usually at a higher level than individual teams or schools or departments, and it's usually an overarching kind of point of looking at decolonization. So here I've got a few examples. So this is a section of the University of Bath's Access and Participation Plan, and specifically intervention strategy number 3, which has this objective. So it's about degree awarding gaps, about to reduce the awarding gap between various groups of students, so between Black and white students or students with disabilities across a range. And you can see they're highlighted. We've actually got decolonizing the curriculum as well as being a part of what's going to help narrow that awarding gap. This full report is 83 pages, and I'm not going to go through it, but there are other activities there to support students from ethnic minority groups and students with declared disabilities. So, for example, they are working in partnership with their student bodies on implementing an inclusive curriculum. And part of this approach is facilitating the establishment of student groups in engineering, science and humanities across a wide range of areas, recognising that students are key to decolonising the curricula, as we've highlighted before, about working in partnership, collaboration between students and staff, all working together to co-create projects, initiatives and resources to ensure that everyone is represented within the curriculum. Have next slide, please, Zoe. Still with the University of Bath, this strategic intervention actually continues, and in relation to the lack of role models, so this is still within intervention strategy 3, the degree awarding gaps, where there's a lack of role models for students that are currently on programme, and this includes staff undergoing unconscious bias training and leading to curriculum transformation, as it mentions there, and as an outcome via the decolonising work. Have the next slide, please, Zoe. And here's just another couple of examples here. So we picked the University of Sussex here. They have a decolonisation statement for the library. It's much bigger than that little screen snippet shows. That's just the introduction to it. And that includes lots of different areas within the library. So in terms of acquisitions, and about how they acquire new parts of the collection, how they undertake cataloguing classification, how they display things, how they do outreach to different groups of students, and again, collaboration. Collaboration is always a major theme through all of these areas that we found. And finally, we have the University of York. So this is very overarching. This is across the university as a whole. They have a statement of approach to decolonising and diversifying the curriculum. And again, it's much bigger document. There's lots of links as well together from that off their website. But they actually want to highlight, they have a detailed statement on decolonisation and diversification, which they have a number of key principles. So they are looking at decolonising and diversifying is an ongoing process with a lasting legacy. They reflect the wider global and historical perspectives through questioning of knowledge, theories, and traditions. They acknowledge and challenge power dynamics in knowledge production, promoting an ethical and empowering education for students, co-creation of resources of both with staff and students working collaboratively together. So there's that theme of collaboration again, and a holistic approach that takes place at all levels of the university. So it's kind of engaging the whole university. Okay, so in summary then, so next slide, please, Zoe. So in summary, decolonisation in computing and kind of the wider area of STEM is still a developing area of study. And some of our next steps here that we've outlined here is to start developing the case studies based on our audit findings and some initial surveys that we ran, to create workshops to gather a variety of stakeholder views. So on people actually tuition delivery, actually delivering the curriculum, academics that perhaps engaging in research, and the management of courses and management of the university as a whole. To continue to attend conferences to engage with computing educators and to spread the word, and building contacts to create a decolonisation network. It's always better to work together, to have that collaboration. We've shown that as a theme throughout this evening's presentation, and to think about your positionality. What can you do today, this week, next month, next year to actually promote a decolonised curriculum? Okay, so I'd like to thank everyone very much for attending. There's references there, but obviously if there are any questions in the chat, we'll be quite happy to address them.